April 16th, 1945. A misty dawn breaks over the rolling hills of Bavaria, Germany. The small village of Oberhausen lies nestled in a valley, seemingly untouched by the conflict that has ravaged Europe for nearly 6 years. In the grand villa overlooking the village, two unusually tall young women, Elsa and Margaret Hoffmann, prepare to flee their home, convinced that the approaching American troops would bring nothing but destruction and vengeance. Little did they know, their encounter with an American medic named Robert Miller would transform their understanding of the enemy and challenge everything they had been told about the men on the other side of the conflict. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the remarkable tale of how compassion crossed battle lines and how 3 lives were forever changed when humanity triumphed over propaganda during the final days of the European conflict in 1945. In the Hoffmann household, the morning routine carried on with practiced precision, despite the distant rumble of artillery that occasionally shook the windows. Standing at 6 feet 2 inches tall, 19-year-old Elsa Hoffmann wrapped a thick woolen shawl around her shoulders as she gazed out the kitchen window at the misty fields. Her sister Margaret, even taller at 6 feet 4 inches and just 17, methodically packed bread, dried sausage and apples into a canvas rucksack. Both women had inherited their unusual height from their father, General Friedrich Hoffmann, a high-ranking officer in the German military leadership whose whereabouts had been unknown to them for 3 weeks. "Do you think Father will find us at Aunt Greta's?" Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her long blonde braids hung heavily down her back as she worked, fingers trembling slightly, with each distant boom that echoed across the valley. Elsa turned from the window, her blue eyes hardening with determination. "He has always found us before. This time will be no different." She spoke with conviction, though uncertainty had taken root in her heart. The letters from their father had stopped coming weeks ago, and rumors of German defeat spread through the village, despite official announcements of imminent victory. The sisters had lived a privileged life as the daughters of a respected military leader. Their home was spacious, with polished wooden floors, ornate furniture, and shelves lined with books, luxuries many Germans had long forgotten in these final days of the conflict. Growing up, they had been educated by private tutors and raised to believe in the superiority of their nation and its cause. However, as the fighting had drawn closer to home and supplies grew scarcer, cracks had formed in the foundation of their sheltered existence. "The radio says the Americans are barbarians," Margareta said softly, securing the rucksack with a leather strap. "That they show no mercy to German civilians." Elsa nodded grimly. "Father said they would make examples of families connected to military leadership. That is why we must leave before they arrive." She moved to the cabinet and retrieved a small wooden box containing their mother's jewelry and a few family photographs, the only sentimental items they could afford to carry. Their mother had passed away 3 years earlier from pneumonia, leaving the sisters in the care of their father and their housekeeper, Frau Weber, an elderly widow from the village who had essentially become family. This morning, Frau Weber had gone to secure a cart for their journey, promising to return before noon. Across the Atlantic Ocean, 24-year-old Robert Miller had never imagined he would find himself in rural Germany when he enlisted in the United States Army in 1942. Growing up in Fremont, Nebraska, the son of a wheat farmer and a schoolteacher, his world had consisted of endless golden fields, Friday night baseball games, and Sunday services at the local Methodist church. Standing at 5 feet 9 inches with sandy brown hair and kind hazel eyes, he had a natural talent for putting people at ease, a quality that served him well as a combat medic. Prior to the conflict, Robert had been studying medicine at the University of Nebraska. His professors noted his exceptional empathy and steady hands, ideal traits for a surgeon. When the United States entered the fighting, Robert felt called to put his medical training to use, even though it meant postponing his education. "You always did care too much about everyone else," his mother had said as she hugged him goodbye at the train station. "Just make sure you come back to us. Bobby." After basic training, Robert was assigned to the 4th Infantry Division as a combat medic. He carried no weapon, only his medical supplies. "I came to save lives, not take them," he often told the other soldiers in his unit. Some called him naive, Others admired his conviction, but all respected his courage as he ran into dangerous situations to treat the wounded, friend or foe alike. By April 1945, Robert's division had pushed deep into German territory. The conflict was clearly approaching its end, though pockets of resistance remained. Robert had witnessed the horrors of combat and treated countless injuries, yet somehow maintained his fundamental belief in human decency. "Everyone's someone's son or brother or father," he would say when questioned about treating injured German soldiers. "The uniform doesn't change that." Captain James Wilson, Robert's commanding officer, found his idealism both refreshing and concerning. "Miller, that big heart of yours is going to get you into trouble one day," he warned, after Robert had risked his safety to treat an injured German civilian caught in crossfire. "With respect, sir," Robert replied, "the day I stop seeing people as people is the day I lose what I'm fighting for." On that April morning, Robert's medical unit had established an aid station in an abandoned schoolhouse 5 miles west of Oberhausen. The main forces would continue their advance eastward, while a smaller detachment, including Robert, would remain to treat the wounded and provide aid to civilians if needed. As Robert organized supplies, bandages, sulfur powder, plasma, morphine, he listened to the radio operator receive reports of the advance. German resistance in the area had been minimal, with most military units retreating or surrendering. The conflict seemed distant that morning, almost peaceful, though Robert knew better than to trust such deceptive calm. "Miller," called Captain Wilson, ducking through the doorway of the stone schoolhouse. "We've got reports of civilians still in Oberhausen. Battalion wants us to send someone to assess the situation, see if there are any medical needs before the main force moves through." Robert looked up from his inventory. "I'll go." "Sir?" The captain hesitated. "Take Jennings with you. Just because we haven't seen much resistance doesn't mean it's not out there." "Yes, sir." Robert nodded, though he preferred working alone. Private Tom Jennings was a good soldier, but jumpy, especially around civilians. Robert believed his own presence was less threatening without armed accompaniment. Back at the Hoffman Villa, the sisters continued their preparations for departure. Each packed one suitcase with essential clothing and personal items. The family's silver and other valuables were carefully wrapped and hidden beneath the floorboards in the cellar, a precaution their father had insisted upon months earlier. "If we leave now, we could reach Aunt Greta's by nightfall," Margaret suggested, checking the grandfather clock in the hall. Its steady tick-tock had been the heartbeat of their childhood home. Elsa shook her head. "We promised Frau Weber we would wait. She knows these roads better than we do, and Father would never forgive us if we left her behind." The distant rumble of engines caused both sisters to freeze. Elsa rushed to the window, pulling back the heavy curtain just enough to peer outside. A single American jeep was approaching on the main road that wound through the village toward their hillside home. "They're here," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "One vehicle, perhaps just a scouting party." Margaret joined her at the window, her unusually tall frame making it easy to see over her sister's head. "What should we do, run?" Elsa considered their options quickly. "No, there's no time to reach the woods without being seen. We'll hide in the cellar. If they're just passing through, they may not even approach the house." The sisters hurried to gather their packed belongings, carrying them down the narrow stone steps to the cellar. The space was cool and dry, used primarily for storing preserves and wine. Their father had reinforced the walls and ceiling years ago as a precaution against air raids, though their remote location had spared them from such attacks. "What about Frau Weber?" Margaret asked, as Elsa pulled the cellar door closed above them. "She's smart. If she sees American soldiers, she'll stay in the village until they leave." Elsa replied, though worry creased her brow. At 67, their housekeeper was spry for her age, but not as quick as she once was. The sisters settled in the darkest corner of the cellar, their unusual height making them crouch uncomfortably beneath the low ceiling. The only light came from thin shafts that penetrated through small ground-level windows. They sat in silence, listening intently to the sounds above. Robert guided the jeep slowly along the village's cobblestone street. Oberhausen appeared largely deserted, though he occasionally caught glimpses of curtains moving in windows or doors closing as they approached. Fear, not hostility, seemed to be the prevailing sentiment among those who remained. "Place gives me the creeps," muttered Private Jennings from behind the wheel. "Like a ghost town." "They're scared," Robert replied. "Wouldn't you be if foreign troops were rolling into your hometown?" Jennings shrugged. After what their armies did across Europe, hard to feel too sorry for them. Robert didn't respond. He understood his fellow soldiers' sentiment, but couldn't bring himself to view all Germans as the enemy, especially civilians. His own grandparents had emigrated from Germany to America in the 1890s. In another life, these could have been his people. As they reached the village square, Robert noticed an elderly woman struggling with a broken wheel on a wooden cart. She wore a faded black dress and a headscarf, her weathered hands working futilely to reattach the damaged wheel. "Stop here," Robert instructed. Jennings frowned. "Captain said to do a quick sweep and report back." "This is part of the sweep," Robert insisted. "Won't take long." Reluctantly, Jennings stopped the jeep. Robert grabbed his medical bag, a reflex more than a necessity in this situation, and approached the woman slowly, hands visible to show he meant no harm. The woman, Frau Weber, looked up with undisguised terror as the American soldier approached. She had been trying to repair the cart she'd borrowed from a neighbor to help the Hoffman sisters escape. Now, face to face with what she had been told was the enemy, she froze. "It's okay," Robert said in the basic German he had learned during his deployment. "I help. I am a doctor." He pointed to the red cross on his helmet and medical bag. Frau Weber remained silent, eyes wide with suspicion and fear. Robert crouched down to examine the wheel. The wooden axle had split, rendering the cart unusable. He looked up at the frightened woman and smiled reassuringly. "Where were you going with this cart?" he asked in his broken German. After a long moment of hesitation, Frau Weber spoke. "To help my girls leave. They are alone." Her English was heavily accented but understandable. She had learned it decades ago in school. "Your daughters?" Robert asked. Frau Weber hesitated again, then shook her head. "Not daughters. I care for them, since they were small. Their mother is gone." Robert nodded, understanding. "Are they sick? Injured? I can help." "No, no sick. Just afraid." Frau Weber wrung her hands, torn between fear of this American soldier and concern for the Hoffman sisters waiting for her return. From the jeep, Jennings called impatiently. "Miller, we need to move on." Robert held up one finger, asking for a moment. To Frau Weber, he said, "Where are these girls? If they're alone and scared, maybe I can help them too." The housekeeper's internal struggle was visible on her face. Finally, concern for her charges outweighed her fear. "The big house on the hill, Schickter," she said, pointing toward the Hoffman villa visible above the village. "I promised I would come back. The wheel broke." Her voice trailed off. Robert patted her arm gently. "We will take you there," he offered. "In our jeep." Frau Weber's eyes widened. "You will not hurt them." "No one will be hurt," Robert assured her. "I'm a medic, a doctor. I help people." After another moment of consideration, Frau Weber nodded slowly. Robert helped her to the jeep, explaining to an incredulous Jennings that they were giving the woman a ride home. "Are you crazy?" Jennings hissed. "For all we know, she's leading us into a trap." "Does she look like she's setting a trap?" Robert countered, helping Frau Weber into the back seat. "She's just worried about the girls she cares for." Jennings muttered under his breath but put the jeep in gear, following Frau Weber's hesitant directions toward the hillside villa. In the cellar of the Hoffman home, the sisters heard the approaching vehicle. Margaret clutched Elsa's hand, her knuckles white with fear. "They're coming here," she whispered unnecessarily. Elsa squeezed her sister's hand. "Remember what Father taught us. Reveal nothing. Say nothing of consequence. If questioned, we are simply German civilians waiting for the conflict to end." The sound of car doors slamming, followed by voices, including one that was unmistakably Frau Weber's, caused both sisters to exchange startled looks. "She's with them," Margareta gasped. "Do you think they captured her?" Before Elsa could answer, they heard Frau Weber calling their names, her voice echoing through the house above. "Elsa, Margarete, kommt heraus, it is safe." The sisters shared a confused glance. Elsa rose cautiously, her tall frame still bent beneath the low ceiling. "Stay here," she instructed her younger sister. "I'll see what's happening." "No," Margaret grabbed her arm. "We stay together. Father said always stay together." Elsa hesitated, then nodded. Together, the sisters climbed the narrow stairs and cautiously opened the cellar door. The sight that greeted them was surprising. Frau Weber standing in the entrance hall with 2 American soldiers. One looked tense, his posture rigid as his eyes darted around the spacious interior of their home. The other, shorter, with kind eyes and a red cross on his helmet, was speaking softly to Frau Weber. When the sisters emerged from the cellar, all conversation stopped. Robert and Jennings stared in surprise at the 2 uncommonly tall young women. "Mein Gott!" Frau Weber exclaimed, rushing to embrace them. "I was so worried when the wheel broke. But this doctor, this American doctor, he offered to help." Robert found himself momentarily speechless. He had not expected to find 2 such striking young women in this remote village house. Their unusual height was immediately noticeable, but it was their dignified bearing, despite obvious fear, that impressed him most. Recovering his composure, Robert stepped forward with a gentle smile. "Hello," he said in English, unsure if they would understand. "I'm Staff Sergeant Robert Miller, a medic with the United States Army. This is Private Jennings." Elsa straightened to her full height, a good 5 inches taller than Robert. "I am Elsa Hoffman," she replied, in accented but clear English. "This is my sister, Margaret." Jennings whispered under his breath, "Giants," earning a sharp look from Robert. "We speak English," Elsa continued coolly. "Our father insisted we learn several languages." Robert nodded appreciatively. "That makes things easier. Frau Weber was concerned about you both. She said you were planning to leave?" "That was our intention," Elsa confirmed cautiously. "We thought it safer to stay with our aunt until—" She paused, unsure how to delicately reference the end of hostilities. "Until the fighting stops," Robert finished for her. "I understand, but the roads aren't safe right now. There are troop movements, and civilians could get caught in dangerous situations." "So we are prisoners." Margaret spoke for the first time, her voice higher than her sister's, but with the same refined accent. Robert shook his head emphatically. "No, not at all. You're not prisoners. We're just concerned for your safety." He glanced around the spacious entrance hall with its polished wooden staircase and family portraits. "This house seems secure. You might be safer staying here for now." Jennings shifted uncomfortably. "Miller, we should report back. Captain's expecting us." Robert acknowledged him with a nod before turning back to the sisters. "Are you in need of anything? Food? Medical attention?" Elsa's expression remained guarded. "We have sufficient provisions for now. Thank you, Sergeant Miller." "Robert, please," he offered with a warm smile. "If it's all right, I'd like to check back tomorrow. Make sure you're all doing okay. Our medical station isn't far." Frau Weber nodded enthusiastically before either sister could respond. Yes, very kind, thank you." Elsa studied the American medic carefully. His behavior contradicted everything she had been told to expect from enemy soldiers. Where was the brutality, the vengeance? This man seemed genuinely concerned for their welfare. "As you wish," she finally said. "We will be here." Robert smiled again. "Good. And please, if you need help before then, the schoolhouse in Lauterbach has been converted to our medical station. Anyone there can direct you to me." As the Americans prepared to leave, Margaret suddenly blurted, "Why are you being kind to us? We are Germans." Robert paused at the doorway. "You're people who might need help. That's all that matters to me." With a final nod, he followed Jennings to the jeep. As they drove away, Jennings could no longer contain himself. What was that all about? Since when do we provide personal house calls to German civilians? They're scared, alone, and were about to put themselves in danger by traveling on open roads, Robert replied evenly. "Checking on them is the right thing to do." "Did you see the size of those girls?" Jennings continued. "Never seen women that tall. And this house, pretty fancy for ordinary Germans. Something doesn't add up." Robert had noticed the signs of wealth and privilege as well, but it wasn't his place to judge. "Our job is to help where we can, not investigate civilians." As they continued toward their base, Neither man noticed the small framed photograph in the entrance hall they had just left. A proud General Friedrich Hoffmann in full military regalia with his arms around his much younger daughters. After the Americans departed, Frau Weber busied herself preparing a simple lunch while the sisters processed this unexpected encounter. They seemed decent, Margaret said hesitantly, as though admitting something forbidden. Elsa paced the kitchen, her long legs carrying her from window to door and back again. One interaction proves nothing. Father warned us they would appear friendly to gain trust before showing their true intentions. But he helped Frau Weber without asking for anything in return, Margaret countered, and he's coming back tomorrow just to check on us. Perhaps to gather information, Elsa suggested, though her conviction wavered. The American medic had seemed genuinely concerned, his eyes kind, and his manner respectful. Nothing like the barbaric invaders described in the radio broadcasts. Frau Weber set a pot of potato soup on the table. "I have known many men in my 67 years, she said wisely. I can tell a good heart when I see one. That American doctor has a good heart." Elsa sighed. "For now we wait. Father will contact us when he can. Until then, we must be cautious, polite but guarded." What none of them could know was that General Friedrich Hoffmann had been captured 2 weeks earlier near Frankfurt. He was currently being held at a prisoner processing center, where his high rank had placed him under special observation. The general had managed to conceal his most important secret, the location of his daughters, but worried constantly about their safety as American forces moved eastward across Germany. That evening in the medical station, Robert filed his report with Captain Wilson, describing the village as largely abandoned except for a few civilians, including the elderly housekeeper and 2 young women at the hillside villa. "No signs of military presence or resistance?" the captain asked. "None, sir. Just scared civilians." Captain Wilson made notes on his clipboard. "Any medical needs?" "Not currently, but I offered to check back tomorrow. The women were planning to travel cross-country, which could have put them at risk." The captain raised an eyebrow, "Going above and beyond, as usual, Miller." His tone was more resigned than critical. "Just don't make a habit of adopting every civilian in our path. We're moving operations forward the day after tomorrow." "Understood, sir. One follow-up visit, then we move on." Later, as Robert organized supplies for the next day, the regiment's intelligence officer, Lieutenant Davis, approached him. "Heard you visited a fancy house on the hill today," he began casually. Robert continued his inventory. "Just checking on civilians as ordered." "Any idea who lived there? Names?" "Hoffmann," Robert replied. 2 sisters and their elderly housekeeper." Lieutenant Davis's expression changed subtly. "Hoffmann? You're sure?" "That's what they said." "Elsa and Margrethe Hoffmann. Is that significant?" The intelligence officer shrugged too casually. "Might be nothing. Hoffmann's a common name. Any photos, documents, mail lying around?" Robert frowned. "I wasn't snooping through their personal belongings, Lieutenant. I was there as a medic." "Of course," Davis nodded, backing off, "just keeping our eyes open. Some high-ranking German officers have families tucked away in places like this." He walked away, leaving Robert with a vague sense of unease. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Robert secured permission to make his follow-up visit, bringing a small package of medical supplies and extra rations as a gesture of goodwill. This time he drove alone, having convinced Captain Wilson that one unarmed medic posed no security risk and would appear less threatening to the German civilians. At the Hoffmann villa, the night had passed tensely. The sisters took turns keeping watch, though for what exactly, neither could say. The American advance had continued eastward, and the village remained quiet. "Perhaps they truly are just passing through," Margaret suggested as they prepared breakfast, a meager meal of thin porridge that reflected the increasingly scarce food supplies. "Perhaps," Elsa conceded. She had spent much of the night questioning everything she had been raised to believe about the Americans. Her father had described them as undisciplined, vengeful, and brutal, nothing like the respectful medic who had visited them. The sound of an approaching vehicle sent Frau Weber to the window. "He has returned," she announced. "The doctor." Elsa smoothed her simple dress, suddenly conscious of her appearance. "Remember, be polite, but careful what you say." Robert parked the jeep and approached the house with a friendly wave. Frau Weber opened the door before he could knock, greeting him warmly as though he were an expected guest, rather than a soldier from an enemy nation. "Good morning," he said, presenting the small package of supplies. "I brought some medical items you might find useful: bandages, aspirin, antiseptic, and some extra rations if you'll accept them." Frau Weber took the package gratefully. "So kind. Please come in. I have made coffee. Not real coffee, but the best we have." Robert followed her into the kitchen where the Hoffman sisters stood like sentinels, their unusual height even more striking in the domestic setting. Both nodded politely as he entered. "I hope you passed a comfortable night," Robert said, accepting the cup of ersatz coffee Frau Weber offered. "As comfortable as can be expected," Elsa replied. She seemed less guarded today, though still maintaining a certain formality. "Thank you for the supplies. It's unexpected." Robert smiled. "Just doing my job. How long have you lived in Oberhausen?" "All our lives," Margareta answered. "Our family home has been here for 3 generations. "It's a beautiful area," Robert said sincerely. "Reminds me a little of the countryside near my hometown in Nebraska." "Nebraska," Margaret repeated, her eyes brightening with interest. "I read about the American Great Plains in school. Is it true? The fields of wheat stretch as far as the eye can see?" Robert nodded, pleased by her interest. "In some places, yes. My father's farm has wheat fields that seem to touch the horizon. In spring, when the wind blows, the wheat moves like waves on an ocean." "How poetic," Elsa observed, a hint of surprise in her voice. "My mother is the poetic one," Robert admitted. "She teaches literature at the local school. She always said I got my healing hands from my father, and my way with words from her." The conversation continued, cautiously at first, then with increasing ease. Robert described his medical studies at university, his family's farm, and his hope to return to complete his education after the conflict ended. The sisters, in turn, shared small details of their life in Oberhausen, their love of music — Elsa played piano, Margarete violin — their education and their passion for literature. Carefully avoided were any mentions of politics, the ongoing conflict, or Herr Hoffmann's occupation and whereabouts. If Robert noticed these omissions, he didn't press the issue. As their talk continued, Frau Weber busied herself around the kitchen, occasionally adding her own observations or memories. The tension that had filled the house since the Americans' arrival gradually eased, replaced by something approaching normal human connection. "You both speak excellent English," Robert commented. "Better than my German, certainly." "Our father insisted," Elsa explained. "He believed in the importance of languages. We also speak French and some Italian." "I struggled just to learn medical terminology in Latin," Robert laughed, "though I've picked up bits of French and German during my time here." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of engines, several vehicles approaching from the east. Robert moved to the window, his expression turning serious. "Those aren't American vehicles," he said quietly. "German transport trucks, coming from the direction of Munich." The sisters exchanged alarmed glances. "A retreat?" Margaret suggested. Robert shook his head. "I need to report this. Our intelligence indicated all German military units had withdrawn from this area." He turned to the sisters. "I should go before they arrive. If these are German soldiers, my presence could create complications." Elsa nodded quickly. "Yes, you should leave." As Robert moved toward the door, the sound of the trucks grew louder. They were approaching quickly, too quickly for him to reach his jeep and drive away without being seen. "They're almost here," Frau Weber said anxiously, peering through the window. 3 trucks, soldiers." Elsa made a split-second decision. "The cellar. You must hide." Robert hesitated. "If they find me here—" "They won't," Elsa interrupted. "But if you're caught driving away, they will certainly stop you." Recognizing the logic in her argument, Robert followed Elsa to the cellar door. As he descended the stairs, he turned to her with a questioning look. "Why are you helping me?" Elsa appeared momentarily taken aback by the question, as though she hadn't considered her own motivations. "Because it's the right thing to do," she finally said, echoing his words from the previous day. The cellar door closed just as the trucks rumbled to a stop outside. From his hiding place, Robert could hear muffled voices above, orders being shouted, boots on the wooden floors, the deeper tones of male voices mixing with the women's responses. Above in the kitchen, Elsa and Margaret found themselves facing a Lieutenant Schmidt and two soldiers who had entered without waiting for an invitation. The lieutenant, a thin man with cold eyes, surveyed the room with obvious suspicion. "Fräulein Hoffmann," he addressed Elsa with a stiff bow. "We were told we might find temporary shelter here. We are transporting important documents to a secure location and need to rest our drivers." Elsa maintained her composure admirably. "Of course, Lieutenant. As daughter of a German officer, I understand the importance of your mission." She gestured toward the sitting room. "You and your men are welcome to rest. Frau Weber can prepare refreshments if supplies allow." The lieutenant's eyes narrowed slightly. "You have sufficient supplies? Many civilians are facing shortages." "We manage with what we have," Elsa replied carefully, "though fresh meat and butter are distant memories now." The lieutenant seemed satisfied with this answer. "My men will remain with the trucks. I would appreciate a quiet place to review our route." His eyes scanned the room again. "Has anyone else passed through Oberhausen recently? We were told American forces were advancing in this region." "We saw vehicles on the main road yesterday," Margaret offered. "They did not stop in the village." It wasn't exactly a lie, but it carefully omitted Robert's visits. Elsa shot her sister a warning glance. "I see," the lieutenant nodded. "And you've had no direct contact with American soldiers?" "Why would we?" Elsa countered, her tone deliberately indignant. "We are loyal Germans. My father serves the fatherland with honor." The lieutenant studied her face for a moment before nodding. "Of course, forgive my questions, Fräulein Hoffmann. These are difficult times and we must be cautious." He turned to one of his men. "Müller, bring my maps from the truck." For the next hour, Lieutenant Schmidt spread his maps across the dining room table, making notes and calculations while occasionally asking about local roads and terrain. The sisters provided what information they could without appearing too helpful or too obstructive. Frau Weber served the thin coffee and hard bread that comprised their dwindling stores. In the cellar, Robert listened intently, gleaning valuable intelligence about German troop movements and document relocation. Though his German was limited, he understood enough to recognize the strategic importance of what was being discussed above him. He also noted how carefully the Hoffmann sisters navigated the conversation, neither betraying his presence nor appearing overly cooperative with the German officer. Finally, the lieutenant announced they would continue their journey. "We must reach Salzburg by nightfall," he explained, as he carefully folded his maps. "The Americans advance quickly, and these documents must not fall into their hands." As the Germans prepared to leave, Margaret impulsively asked, "Have you any news of our father, Lieutenant? General Hoffmann? We have not heard from him in several weeks." The lieutenant's expression softened slightly, the first human emotion he had displayed. "I regret I have no specific information about General Hoffmann, Fräulein. Communications have been difficult, but your father is a resourceful and respected officer. I'm certain he is continuing to serve with distinction." With that less than reassuring comment, the lieutenant and his men departed, the trucks rumbling away toward the east. The sisters waited several minutes to ensure they were truly gone before opening the cellar door. Robert emerged, looking solemn. "Thank you," he said simply. "You took a significant risk hiding me." Elsa struggled with conflicting emotions. Perhaps we should not have. That officer was transporting important military documents. "Yes," Robert acknowledged, "and I heard most of what was said, information that could be valuable to my superiors." The implicit question hung in the air. Would he use what he had learned against German forces? Forces that might include the sister's father? After a moment, Robert sighed. "Look, I'm a medic. My job is to help the wounded, not gather intelligence, but I can't pretend I didn't hear what I heard." "We understand," Margaret said softly. "You have your duty, as our father has his." Elsa remained silent, her internal conflict visible in her troubled expression. "I should go," Robert said, "before anyone else comes looking for shelter." He moved toward the door, then turned back. Whatever happens, I won't forget what you did today." As he drove back to the American base, Robert wrestled with his conscience. The information he had overheard could potentially save American lives by allowing them to intercept the document transport. Yet he felt an unexpected loyalty to the Hoffman sisters, who had protected him at considerable personal risk. At the base, Robert reported the presence of German vehicles in the area, but omitted specific details about their destination or cargo. He couldn't bring himself to fully betray the sisters' trust, even in service to his own side. Captain Wilson accepted his vague report with some skepticism. "You're telling me you saw German trucks but didn't manage to learn anything about their purpose or destination?" "They didn't stop in the village, sir," Robert replied, the half-truth uncomfortable on his lips. "I observed from a distance 3 transport trucks moving eastward, approximately 15 soldiers." The captain studied him for a moment. "Miller, you're a terrible liar. Something happened out there today that you're not sharing. As your commanding officer, I need to know what it is." Robert hesitated, then decided on a version of the truth. "The German trucks stopped at the Hoffman house, sir. I had to hide to avoid capture. The sisters didn't reveal my presence to the German officer." Captain Wilson's eyebrows rose. "They protected you? An American soldier?" "Yes, sir." "And you heard the Germans discussing their plans while you were hiding?" Robert nodded reluctantly. "Which you're now choosing not to share because you feel you owe these German girls something." The captain's tone was incredulous. "They risked their safety for me, sir." Captain Wilson sighed heavily. "Miller, we're still at war. Whatever personal feelings you've developed for these civilians, it's not like that, sir," Robert interrupted, flushing slightly. "Isn't it?" The captain fixed him with a knowing look. "Lieutenant Davis has been doing some research on the Hoffman family. That house on the hill belongs to General Friedrich Hoffman, currently a prisoner of war and suspected of involvement in significant strategic decisions. Those girls are his daughters." Robert felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him. They never mentioned their father was a general. "Of course not," Wilson replied. "Now, whatever you overheard could be important. I'm ordering you to provide a complete report." Reluctantly, Robert shared what he had learned. The German unit was transporting documents to Salzburg, documents they were desperate to keep from falling into American hands. Captain Wilson immediately relayed this intelligence to headquarters, which ordered an interception operation. By evening, the German transport had been captured near the Austrian border, yielding valuable military documents and intelligence. For the next 2 days, Robert was confined to the base, his medical duties keeping him too busy to think much about the Hoffman sisters. The American advance continued, with most units moving eastward, leaving only a skeleton medical crew in the schoolhouse at Lauterbach. On the 3rd morning, as Robert sorted supplies for transport, a commotion outside drew his attention. Captain Wilson entered the building with Frau Weber, who appeared distressed. "Your German friends need medical assistance, Miller," the captain announced without preamble. "The younger sister has fallen ill." Robert immediately began gathering his medical bag. "What happened?" Frau Weber wrung her hands anxiously. "Fever, very high. Began yesterday. She cannot keep food down. Elsa sent me to find you." Captain Wilson nodded his permission. "Go with her, Miller, but I'm sending Jennings along too. Standard procedure." Within minutes, Robert was in a jeep with Private Jennings and Frau Weber, heading toward the Hoffman villa. The housekeeper explained that Margaret had developed a sudden fever the previous evening, which had worsened throughout the night, despite their efforts to bring it down. When they arrived, Elsa met them at the door, her face etched with worry. "Thank you for coming," she said, leading them immediately upstairs to her sister's bedroom. Margaret lay in bed, her unusually long frame making her appear even more vulnerable. Her face was flushed with fever, her blonde hair damp with sweat. She stirred restlessly, murmuring incoherently. Robert approached the bedside, his professional demeanor taking over. "How long has she been like this?" he asked, placing a hand on her forehead. "The fever began yesterday afternoon," Elsa explained. "It seemed like a simple cold at first, but by evening she was burning with fever. She's been delirious since midnight." Robert conducted a thorough examination, noting Margaret's rapid pulse, elevated temperature, and the distinctive rash beginning to spread across her torso. "Scarlet fever," he diagnosed grimly. It's serious, but treatable. I have penicillin at the medical station, he turned to Jennings. Drive back and bring the medication, you know which cabinet. As Jennings departed, Robert continued his examination. Has she been exposed to anyone with similar symptoms? Elsa shook her head. We've had little contact with others, just your visits and... She trailed off, then continued reluctantly. The German soldiers who stopped here. Robert nodded, understanding. One of them may have been carrying the infection without showing symptoms. He began cooling Margaret with damp cloths. Until Jennings returns with the penicillin, we need to bring her fever down. For the next hour, Robert and Elsa worked together to make Margaret comfortable, changing the cool compresses as they warmed and coaxing her to sip water when she was lucid enough to swallow. Frau Weber prepared broth in the kitchen, though Margaret had little appetite. As they worked, the silence between Robert and Elsa grew increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, Elsa spoke. You know, don't you? About our father. Robert paused, cloth in hand. Yes, my commanding officer told me. Elsa continued, placing a fresh compress on her sister's forehead. And the German transport? With the documents? Intercepted, Robert confirmed quietly. I had to report what I overheard. Elsa nodded, her expression unreadable. I understand. As you said, you have your duty. After a pause, she added, just as I had mine when I hid you from that lieutenant. Why did you? Robert asked the question that had been troubling him. Your father is a German general. By helping me, you were betraying your own side. Elsa considered the question carefully. When I saw you, a medic, unarmed, bringing supplies instead of demands, it contradicted everything I had been told about American soldiers. It made me question what else might be untrue. She met his eyes directly. And you were kind to Frau Weber. Kindness has been in short supply these past years. Before Robert could respond, Jennings returned with the penicillin. Robert immediately prepared an injection for Margarete, explaining to Elsa how the medication would fight the infection. She'll need doses every 6 hours, he instructed. I'll need to stay to administer them and monitor her condition. Jennings looked uncomfortable with this declaration. Captain said to bring the meds and return to base, Miller. We're moving the main medical station tomorrow. Then I'll stay behind, Robert decided. Request permission from Captain Wilson. Margaret needs medical supervision, and I'm the most qualified to provide it. Jennings departed with the request, returning 2 hours later with Captain Wilson's reluctant approval and additional medical supplies. Captain says you're authorized to remain until the patient is stable. I'm to check back tomorrow. Throughout the night, Robert maintained his vigil at Margaret's bedside, administering medication, monitoring her vital signs, and ensuring she remained hydrated. Elsa refused to leave her sister, keeping watch from a chair on the opposite side of the bed. They spoke little. The gravity of Margaret's condition and the complexity of their own situation creating a barrier between them. By dawn, Margaret's fever had begun to subside, her breathing becoming more regular. Robert checked her pulse and nodded with satisfaction. The penicillin is working. She's responding well to treatment. Elsa sagged with relief, the strain of the night's anxiety evident in her face. Thank you, she said simply. If you hadn't come. But I did, Robert replied with a tired smile, and she's going to be all right. He stood, stretching his stiff muscles. You should rest now. I'll continue monitoring her. Elsa shook her head stubbornly. I'll rest when she's awake and talking sensibly again. Robert recognized the determination in her eyes, the same resolve he had seen in countless family members, keeping vigil over their loved ones. At least eat something, he suggested. You need to keep up your strength. Reluctantly, Elsa agreed to go downstairs for breakfast, leaving Robert alone with his patient. While checking Margaret's temperature, he noticed a small photograph on the bedside table, a younger Margaret and Elsa standing beside a tall, distinguished man in a military uniform adorned with medals and insignia of high rank. The family resemblance was unmistakable, particularly the unusual height all three shared. When Elsa returned with a tray of bread and ersatz coffee, she noticed Robert studying the photograph. That was taken 3 years ago, she said, before Mother died, before everything changed. Robert set the picture down carefully. Your father looks very proud. He was, Elsa confirmed. Is, she corrected herself quickly. We haven't heard from him in weeks. We don't know if he's She couldn't complete the sentence. Captured, or worse. Robert finished gently. When Elsa nodded, he continued, I can make inquiries. We keep records of high-ranking prisoners. Elsa looked at him with surprise. You would do that, even knowing who he is? He's your father, Robert said simply. Whatever his rank or role, you deserve to know if he's safe. This unexpected kindness broke through Elsa's carefully maintained composure. Tears filled her eyes, though she quickly blinked them away. Thank you, she whispered. Throughout the day, Margaret's condition continued to improve. By afternoon, she was awake and alert enough to take broth and medication without assistance. The angry red rash had begun to fade, and her fever remained low. You frightened us, Elsa told her sister, smoothing back her blonde hair. Margaret looked from her sister to Robert, who was preparing another penicillin injection. How long have I been ill? Almost 2 days, Robert answered, but you're responding very well to treatment. Margaret studied the American medic with newfound appreciation. You stayed to care for me? Of course, Robert replied as though it were the most natural thing in the world. That's my job. To care for the enemy? Margaret asked softly. Robert smiled. I don't see an enemy here. Just a patient who needed help. That evening, Private Jennings returned with news. The main American forces were continuing their advance eastward, but a small garrison would remain in Oberhausen for another week to maintain order and provide assistance to civilians. Captain says once the patient is stable, you're to report to the new medical station in Rosenheim, Jennings informed Robert. Then, lowering his voice, he added, There's other news. Lieutenant Davis confirmed that General Hoffman is alive. He's being held at a prisoner processing center near Frankfurt. Apparently, he's providing valuable information in exchange for assurances about his family's safety. Robert nodded, processing this information. Thank you, Jennings. Tell Captain Wilson I'll report to Rosenheim as soon as my patient can manage without medical supervision, probably another day or 2. After Jennings departed, Robert debated how to share the news about General Hoffman with Elsa. The fact that her father was cooperating with American intelligence might be difficult for her to accept, yet she deserved to know he was alive and unharmed. He found Elsa in the garden behind the house, sitting on a stone bench among early spring flowers. The evening sun cast a golden light over the landscape, softening the signs of neglect that had accumulated during the war years. Your father is alive, Robert said without preamble as he sat beside her. He's being held at a facility near Frankfurt. According to our intelligence officer, he's in good health. Elsa closed her eyes briefly, relief washing over her features. Thank God, she whispered. After a moment, she asked, Will we be allowed to see him? I don't know, Robert admitted, but I'll try to arrange it if possible. He hesitated before adding, There's something else you should know. He's providing information to American intelligence, apparently in exchange for guarantees of your safety. Elsa's expression hardened. My father would never betray his country. Perhaps he's not seeing it as betrayal, Robert suggested gently. Perhaps he's recognizing that the conflict is ending and trying to protect what matters most to him, you and Margaret. They sat in silence as Elsa absorbed this possibility. Finally, she spoke. Everything is changing so quickly. Everything I was taught to believe. She trailed off, looking out over the garden her mother had once tended with care. War makes everything black and white, Robert said. Peace allows for shades of grey. Is that what's coming? Peace, Elsa asked skeptically. Or just a different kind of conflict? I hope it's peace, Robert replied honestly. A chance to rebuild, to heal. Elsa turned to face him fully. When this is over, what will you do? Return to your studies? Robert nodded. That's the plan. Finish my medical degree. Maybe set up practice in a small town like the one I grew up in. He smiled wryly, though I never imagined my first experience with scarlet fever would be treating a German general's daughter in Bavaria. Life rarely follows our expectations, Elsa observed. 6 months ago, I would have considered an American soldier my enemy. Now—" She left the thought unfinished. "Now," Robert prompted. Elsa met his gaze steadily. "Now I see that people are more complicated than the labels we give them. Enemy, ally. These words don't capture the full truth of who we are." The next morning brought more improvement in Margaret's condition. She was able to sit up, eat a small breakfast and engage in conversation, though fatigue still claimed her frequently. Robert continued the penicillin treatment, explaining that she would need to complete the full course even after her symptoms subsided. "To prevent the infection from returning," he explained, "and to protect your heart. Scarlet fever can cause complications if not fully treated." Margaret nodded, understanding. "In school we learned about rheumatic fever. Is that what you mean?" "Exactly," Robert confirmed, impressed by her knowledge. "You've had medical training." "Just basic nursing courses," Margaret explained. "All girls in our school were required to learn, in case—" She hesitated. "In case we were needed." For the conflict, Robert understood. Young German women prepared to tend their country's wounded. "You'd make a good nurse," he observed. "You're a cooperative patient, which suggests you'd be a compassionate caregiver." Margaret smiled, her first genuine smile since falling ill. "Perhaps when this is all over, when father returns." Again she trailed off, uncertain about their future. Elsa, who had been listening from the doorway, entered the room. "Robert has news," she told her sister. "Father is safe. He's being held by the Americans near Frankfurt." Margaret's eyes widened. "Can we see him?" "I've requested permission," Robert explained. "It's complicated because of his rank, but I've emphasized the humanitarian aspect, daughters reuniting with their father." "Why would you help us this way?" Margaret asked. "Surely your superiors wouldn't approve." Robert considered his answer carefully. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because—" He hesitated, aware of Elsa watching him intently. "Because I believe reconciliation has to start somewhere. Why not with us?" Later that day, Captain Wilson arrived personally to check on the situation. He inspected Margaret's condition with a professional eye, nodding approval at Robert's treatment protocol. "Good work, Miller," he acknowledged. "The patient is clearly improving." "Another day of treatment and observation would be ideal," Robert suggested, "to ensure there are no complications." The captain eyed him skeptically. "Is that your medical opinion, or are there other considerations?" Robert maintained his professional demeanor. "Scarlet fever can lead to serious cardiac complications if the patient resumes activity too soon." "I see." Captain Wilson glanced at Elsa, who stood protectively near her sister's bedside. "Miss Hoffman, I've received word that arrangements are being made for you and your sister to visit your father. Transportation will be provided once your sister is well enough to travel." Elsa looked stunned. "How did you—" The captain's expression softened slightly. "Despite what you may have been led to believe, we're not monsters. Family reunification is a priority, even for high-ranking prisoners." He turned back to Robert. "Miller, you've been reassigned. Once the patient is stable, you'll accompany the Hoffman sisters to the Frankfurt facility. Your medical expertise will ensure the younger Miss Hoffman travels safely, and your familiarity with their situation will ease the transition." Robert couldn't hide his surprise. "Thank you, sir." After the captain departed, Elsa turned to Robert with questioning eyes. "You arranged this?" "I made the request," he admitted, "but I never expected it to be approved, much less to be assigned as your escort." Margaret, who had been listening from her bed, said softly, "Perhaps your captain is wiser than we realized." 3 days later, Margaret was deemed well enough to travel. The penicillin had successfully cleared the infection, and though she remained somewhat weakened, her recovery was progressing without complications. Robert prepared for their journey, securing a military ambulance for transport and additional medical supplies in case of emergency. The morning of their departure, Frau Weber embraced the sisters tearfully. "I will keep the house ready for your return," she promised. "All will be as you left it." The journey to Frankfurt would take most of a day, with an overnight stop planned at an American field hospital where Margaret could rest comfortably. As they traveled northwest through the Bavarian countryside, The sisters witnessed firsthand the physical impact of the conflict. Bombed bridges, damaged buildings, fields untended due to lack of manpower. Yet signs of life continued. Farmers working their land, children playing among ruins, people rebuilding with whatever materials they could salvage. "It will take years to recover," Elsa observed as they passed through a village where women were clearing rubble from the town square. "But it will happen," Robert assured her. "People are resilient, they rebuild." At midday they stopped by a small stream to rest and eat the rations Robert had brought. Margaret, still recovering her strength, lay on a blanket in the shade of an oak tree while Robert and Elsa sat nearby, watching the clear water flow over smooth stones. "What will happen to us?" Elsa asked suddenly. "After we see Father, I mean. Will we be allowed to return home?" Robert considered the question. "I believe so, eventually. There may be restrictions initially, given your father's position, but the goal is normalization, helping civilians return to peaceful lives." "And what about Father? Will he be put on trial?" Robert chose his words carefully. "I don't have that information, but from what I understand, your father's cooperation is being viewed favorably. That suggests leniency may be possible." Elsa nodded, accepting this limited reassurance. "And you?" she asked, her voice softer. "When will you return home to Nebraska?" "Not for a while," Robert replied. "There's still work to be done here. People who need medical attention, communities that need assistance." They fell silent, each contemplating the uncertain future. From her place on the blanket, Margaret watched them with observant eyes, noting the unspoken connection that had formed between her sister and the American medic. That evening at the field hospital, Robert ensured the sisters were provided with comfortable quarters, a small private room normally reserved for officers. He checked Margaret's condition one final time before retiring to the doctor's quarters across the compound. "You should rest," he told both sisters. "Tomorrow we'll reach the processing center. It may be emotionally challenging." After he left, Margarete turned to her sister with a knowing look. "He cares for you." Elsa busied herself unpacking the few personal items they had brought. "He's a medic. Caring is his profession." "That's not what I mean, and you know it," Margaret insisted. "The way he looks at you when he thinks no one notices." "Stop it, Greta," Elsa interrupted, using her childhood nickname for her sister. "Whatever you think you see, it doesn't matter. In a few days, he'll return to his unit, and we'll figure out what comes next for us." Margaret studied her sister's face. "You care for him too." Elsa didn't deny it. "What difference does it make? We come from different worlds. After the conflict ends, those worlds will separate again." "Perhaps," Margaret said thoughtfully. "Or perhaps this experience has changed us all in ways we don't yet understand." The next morning they continued their journey, reaching the prisoner processing facility by early afternoon. The compound was a converted university campus, its academic buildings now serving as administration offices, barracks and detention areas for prisoners of varying ranks. A sign at the entrance identified it as Combined Allied Prisoner Processing Center 4. Robert presented their documentation to the guards at the main gate, who directed them to the administration building. There, a brisk major named Henderson reviewed their papers and made a telephone call, speaking in low tones that the sisters couldn't quite hear. "General Hoffman has been informed of your arrival," the major announced after hanging up. "He'll be brought to the visitors area shortly. Sergeant Miller, you're to accompany them as previously arranged." They were escorted to a large room that had once been a faculty lounge. Comfortable chairs were arranged in conversational groupings, with American soldiers stationed discreetly near the exits. Several other reunions were already in progress, German officers meeting with wives, children, or parents, their conversations creating a low murmur throughout the space. Elsa and Margaret sat nervously on a sofa near a bay window, while Robert stood nearby, giving them space while remaining present for support. After 15 minutes that felt like hours, the door opened to admit a tall, distinguished man in a German officer's uniform, stripped of insignia. General Friedrich Hoffmann had aged since the photograph Robert had seen. His once dark hair was now heavily salted with grey, and lines of strain marked his face. But he stood straight and proud, his bearing unmistakably military despite his prisoner status. When he saw his daughters, the general's composed expression crumbled. "Meine Mädchen," he whispered. "My girls," opening his arms. Elsa and Margarete rushed to embrace their father, the three forming a tight circle of murmured German endearments and tears. Robert stepped back further, recognizing the private nature of this reunion. After the initial emotional greeting, General Hoffmann led his daughters to a quiet corner where they could speak with some privacy. Robert remained at a respectful distance, close enough to be available if needed, but far enough to allow them their family moment. The reunion lasted 2 hours, during which the general listened intently as his daughters recounted their experiences. When they described Robert's role in treating Margaret's illness and arranging the visit, General Hoffmann glanced across the room at the American medic with evident interest. As their allotted time drew to a close, the general beckoned to Robert. "Sergeant Miller," he called in accented but clear English, "would you join us for a moment?" Robert approached somewhat awkwardly, aware of the curious looks from other prisoners and visitors. "Sir," he acknowledged with a respectful nod. "My daughters tell me I owe you a debt of gratitude," General Hoffmann said, studying Robert carefully. "For Margaret's life, perhaps, and certainly for this opportunity to see that my children are safe." "I was just doing my job, sir," Robert replied. The general smiled faintly. "No, young man. Your job was to treat enemy wounded on the battlefield, not to risk your career arranging family reunions." He extended his hand. "Thank you." Robert hesitated only briefly before shaking the offered hand. "You have remarkable daughters, sir. They showed great courage and compassion when they hid me from German officers, potentially at great risk to themselves." The general's eyebrows rose in surprise as he looked at his daughters. "You didn't mention this part of the story." Elsa squared her shoulders. "We weren't sure how you would feel about it." To everyone's surprise, General Hoffmann laughed, a genuine warm sound that seemed to erase years from his face. "Even in defeat you make me proud," he told his daughters. "To recognize humanity beyond uniform and nationality. This is wisdom I feared this conflict had destroyed." When it came time for the general to return to his quarters, he embraced his daughters once more, whispering private words to each. To Elsa, he said, "Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become." To Margaret, "Your strength goes beyond your stature, my little one. Never forget that." To Robert, he said simply, "Take care of them on their journey home." "I will, sir," Robert promised. That evening, Robert arranged for the sisters to stay in officers' quarters within the compound, where they could remain close to their father, though they couldn't see him again until the next day's visiting hours. He found them sitting quietly in their assigned room, processing the emotional experience of the reunion. "He seems well," Robert observed. "Healthy and at peace, somehow." Elsa nodded. "He said he's been treated with respect, and that he's helping to identify art and cultural treasures that were hidden during the conflict, ensuring they're properly preserved rather than destroyed or lost." "That's valuable work," Robert acknowledged. He also said— Elsa hesitated, glancing at her sister, who nodded encouragement. "He said the Americans have offered to resettle us in the United States after his debriefing is complete, as part of his arrangement with intelligence services." Robert tried to hide his surprise. "How do you feel about that possibility?" The sisters exchanged looks again, some unspoken communication passing between them. "We're uncertain," Margaret admitted. "Germany is our home, but there may be nothing left for us there," Elsa finished. "Those who served in leadership positions, their families, we may face resentment, even persecution." "And America?" Robert asked. "Can you imagine building a life there?" "It seems unimaginable," Elsa replied, "yet also full of possibility." She looked directly at Robert. "Father asked if we knew anyone in America who might help us adjust if we decide to accept the offer." The implication hung in the air between them. Robert felt a sudden leap of hope that surprised him with its intensity. "My parents would welcome you," he found himself saying. "Nebraska has many German immigrants. You wouldn't be alone." The following days established a pattern. Mornings spent with General Hoffmann during visiting hours, afternoons exploring the compound's limited recreational facilities, evenings in conversation with Robert as they planned the next phase of their journey. Margaret's strength returned rapidly, and with it her natural curiosity and optimism. On their 5th day at the processing center, Major Henderson summoned them to his office. "We've received authorization for the Hoffman sisters to return to Oberhausen," he informed them. "Sergeant Miller will escort you. Once there, you'll be under the protection of the local garrison until more permanent arrangements can be made." "And our father?" Elsa asked. "General Hoffman will remain here for the foreseeable future," the major replied. "His knowledge is proving extremely valuable, particularly regarding cultural artifacts and their locations. He continues to cooperate fully." The journey back to Bavaria was quieter than their trip to Frankfurt had been. The sisters, having seen their father and confirmed his safety, now faced the uncertainty of their future. Robert, for his part, struggled with the knowledge that his assignment would end once they reached Oberhausen. He would be expected to report to the medical station in Rosenheim, resuming his regular duties. The night before they were to reach Oberhausen, they stayed at the same field hospital that had sheltered them on their outward journey. After ensuring Margaret was comfortably settled, Robert invited Elsa to walk with him around the hospital grounds. In the gentle spring twilight, they strolled along a path bordered by flowering shrubs, their conversation touching on everything from favorite books to childhood memories to hopes for the future. There was a deliberate avoidance of their impending separation, as though by not mentioning it, they could postpone its reality. Finally, as darkness fell and they turned back toward the hospital buildings, Robert broached the subject they had both been avoiding. "Tomorrow we'll reach Oberhausen. Captain Wilson expects me in Rosenheim by the following day." Elsa nodded, her face partially hidden in the gathering shadows. "I know. But it doesn't have to be goodbye," Robert continued. "Not permanently. Once things stabilize, once the occupation transitions to reconstruction—" "What are you suggesting?" Elsa asked quietly. Robert took a deep breath. "That we keep in touch, letters at first, and when circumstances allow, perhaps more. More. A visit, an exploration of possibilities." Robert struggled to articulate feelings that had developed with surprising speed and depth. "Elsa, I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you to be part of mine." Elsa was silent for a long moment. "A German general's daughter and an American medic," she finally said. "It sounds like the beginning of a novel no one would believe." "Yet, here we are," Robert replied, gently taking her hand. "Here we are," Elsa agreed, her fingers intertwining with his. The following day, they arrived in Oberhausen to find the village transformed. American military government had established operations in the town hall, distributing food supplies and organizing cleanup efforts. The Hoffman villa remained untouched, with Frau Weber maintaining it exactly as promised. "Like stepping back in time," Margaret observed as they entered the familiar entrance hall. "Yet everything has changed." Robert helped unload their belongings, delaying the inevitable moment of departure. Frau Weber busied herself preparing a welcome meal from the rations Robert had brought, chattering happily about village developments in their absence. "The American captain, Wilson, is it? He has been most fair," she reported. "Established rules, yes, but reasonable ones. Some young soldiers help old Herr Schmidt repair his roof. Others cleared debris from the square." Robert smiled at this report of his captain's administration. Wilson was gruff but fair, committed to rebuilding rather than punishing. As afternoon faded into evening, Robert could delay no longer. "I need to report to Rosenheim by noon tomorrow," he said reluctantly. "I should leave soon." Frau Weber, sensing the emotional undercurrents, tactfully retreated to the kitchen. Margaret, after embracing Robert and thanking him again for saving her life, followed suit, leaving him alone with Elsa in the entrance hall. "I've written my parents' address in Nebraska," Robert said, handing Elsa a folded paper. "And my unit information. Letters may take time to reach me, but they will eventually." Elsa took the paper, her fingers brushing his. "I will write, and I'll discuss Father's American offer with Margaret. It's not as unthinkable as it once seemed." Robert reached out to touch her cheek gently. "Whatever you decide, wherever you end up, I'll find you." "Is that a promise, Sergeant Miller?" Elsa asked, a hint of her old formality returning. "The most important one I've ever made," Robert replied solemnly. Their goodbye was brief but heartfelt, a promise contained in a simple embrace, a future envisioned in a gentle kiss. As Robert drove away from the Hoffman villa, he carried with him not just memories but hope for what might come after the healing began. 6 months later, as autumn painted the Nebraska countryside in russet and gold, Robert Miller stood on the platform of the Fremont train station. Honorably discharged from the Army, he had resumed his medical studies at the university while maintaining regular correspondence with Elsa Hoffman. The train from New York was due any minute. Robert checked his watch for the dozenth time, straightened his tie, and adjusted the bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. The distant whistle announced the train's approach. As it steamed into the station, Robert scanned the windows anxiously. The first passengers began to disembark. Businessmen, families, soldiers returning home. And then he saw them, 2 uncommonly tall women descending carefully from the train, their blonde heads rising above the crowd. Behind them came an older man, distinguished despite his civilian clothes, and the familiar figure of Frau Weber, clutching her handbag nervously. The Hoffman family had accepted the American government's offer. General Friedrich Hoffman, after providing extensive information about art repositories and cultural treasures, had been granted a reduced sentence and eventually permission to emigrate with his daughters. Frau Weber, having no family remaining in Germany, had chosen to accompany the only family she had left. Elsa spotted Robert first, her face lighting with recognition. She moved toward him with purposeful strides, her sister and father following. When they reached each other, no words were necessary. The embrace they shared spoke of promises kept and futures beginning. "Welcome home," Robert said simply when they finally stepped apart. "All of you." General Hoffman extended his hand to the young man who had saved both his daughters in different ways. "We have much to learn about your country, Sergeant Miller." "Robert, please," he corrected gently. "And we have plenty of time for learning." "A lifetime, I hope." Elsa smiled at the implication, taking Robert's arm as they walked toward the station exit. Behind them, Margarete exchanged a knowing look with Frau Weber. Their unusual height had once made the Hoffman sisters stand out in their Bavarian village. Here, in this new land, they would still stand out, but for reasons entirely of their own making. As they left the station, Robert pointed out the golden wheat fields stretching to the horizon. "Just like I described it," he told Elsa, "waves on an ocean." "It's beautiful," she replied, seeing not just the landscape, but the future it represented. A good place to begin again. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.